Welcome to the Foundation Series, your deep dive into startup compensation with industry leaders from across the startup world. Join me, Matt McFarlane, a people operations leader turned compensation specialist, as we uncover the strategies and practices driving success in tech startups around the world. Hear insights from heads of people, founders, and experts as we explore how to build robust compensation frameworks that not only fuel growth and retention, but do so in the dynamic startup environment that we all know and love. Let's get into it. Welcome to today's episode, where we break down why and how startups should pay the people building their culture through employee resource groups, how it moves these priorities beyond passion projects to real accountability, clarity, and impact. If you're serious about building culture, you can't miss this. Naomi, so excited to welcome you to the Foundation Series. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited about these discussions that we're about to have. But before we dive straight into the topics, I'd love you to spend a brief moment, and for those who aren't familiar with you, a little bit about who you are and what you do.
I love that. The not being familiar with me, it's like they'd be perfectly forgiven for not being familiar with me. So my name is Naomi Trickey. I'm the Chief People Officer at a company called Mews. We provide hospitality software for hotels in order to free up the people who work in those hotels to provide remarkable experiences for their guests. I'm also a NED for an embedded finance company called Griffin. So I chair the People and Governance Committee. So that is me. I've worked in technology for a scarily long time in a variety of roles, but started becoming I became a Chief People Officer about 10 years ago. So I've been doing this work since then.
Nice. We won't have to get too specific on the details of years and things like that, but safe to say it sounds like you are incredibly busy, not only with your your full-time role, but also your NED role as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't think I've met a Chief People Officer that isn't busy, and I think one of the things I love most about this work is that Chief People Officers and the people that work with them and for them tend to be really intrinsically motivated. They just love the work, right? And intrinsically motivated people are never bored because there's always something new to learn, and the people space is, it's fascinating because people are fascinating.
Yeah, it's always been my response to what's the best and the worst thing about the job is it's the people. It's like they make it the highest of highs, but sometimes the lowest of lows as well. So I hear where you're coming from.
Yeah, it's so true. It's like, I interview people a lot, and I always sort of have a little inner sigh when I ask why they want the job, or a version of that question, but because I love people. It's like, you don't do this job because you love people. You might love to help people, but I'm more interested in people who are fascinated by people, because it's not about liking or not liking. It's not about being nice or not being nice. It's something more nuanced than that, I think, that makes this work interesting.
All right, let's dive into our first topic. So this kind of came across my desk. This sort of came across my radar, via LinkedIn, as most good things do. And yeah, just deeply fascinating to me. I hadn't seen it being done anywhere else, but it was this post that you published about how Mews had begun to remunerate ERGs, so employee resource groups, for those not familiar with the acronym. I'd love to understand this a bit more as someone who's just, it stood out to me as being something different that organizations aren't commonly doing the same as, but just understand a bit about the catalyst. So maybe let's just start there and just, I'd love to understand a bit more about the sort of genesis for remunerating your ERG groups at Mews.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I should say that, this is not just me involved in this. So it's my VP of ESG, Ella McCann-Tomlin. So follow her on LinkedIn, and Matt Weller, who is our CEO. So it's a real, I'm very, very fortunate to work in an environment where this kind of thing is still being talked about. It's being, this agenda is being pushed quite heavily. So I just wanted to give them both a shout out, really, because you can't do this kind of stuff on your own. It's terribly lonely. And the catalyst for remunerating the ERGs. So the challenge with volunteering activity, and I don't mean to, I'm sure I'm talking to the choir here, is that ERG work historically it's been really hard to drive accountability. for the work, because it wasn't seen as people's core responsibilities. It's something, it's passion work, right? And, why would you pay someone for their passion? Um, and so at Mews, we have a lot of those passion, a lot of people filled with passion who meant really well and wanted to do good. And they created some ERGs, but were getting really burnt out because they were leading those ERGs without being really clear on the responsibilities. And that's hard, especially if you're doing it alongside a really busy core role and you don't know how to get out of it either when things get tough. So the kind of the contract is a little off. So we thought if we wanted it to be valued and taken seriously, we knew that we had to remunerate people in some way. And that would have the advantage that we could then hold them accountable for the value and the impact that they had with the work. And plus, frankly, it's the right thing to do. So we all know that unpaid and invisible labour is often taken on by women and people from marginalised background or historically marginalised backgrounds. And not paying people for their work is based on a historical precedent that honestly no right thinking person should tolerate, let alone condone or perpetuate. So that was the catalyst. It was a set of principles, but it was also a very clear business decision, that if you want to drive certain behaviours and you want to drive certain activities, then like no one does this for free.
Yeah. Yeah, I love in particular you're creating clarity around something that is so often amorphous within an organization,
Mm.
as you've said. And in particular, as you were saying that, it came to mind like how many times people, myself included, have been maybe this driver behind a particular issue or an ERG, but maybe you just get a bit tired and you sort of, it lacks a bit of momentum. It's still something that's valuable to the organization, but it isn't being as driven with the same kind of gusto as what you were previously for whatever reason. Maybe you've got something going on at home, just a busy life, etc. But I like that it kind of creates these clear boundaries around actually it is something we value. It's kind of a bolt onto your role. And, maybe it gives people the comfort and the catalyst or the ability to say, actually, I'm no longer happy wearing this extra hat. Can I take it off and share it
Yep.
with somebody else?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, there's a horrible irony, isn't there, in terms of undermining that, really, because actually you're taking the passion out of something that is driven by passion. My view is that the relationship between the role of a chief people officer is to manage the relationship between an employee and the organization, and compensation in all of its forms and engagement in all of its forms and at all moments in that journey is something that we should be engaging in and thinking deeply about. And now we have the data, for example, to do that, which is great. But I do think that that there are many versions of the contract that you have with your employees. There's the obvious literal contract, but there's this kind of social contract which can feel really nebulous, and how you and chief people officers are increasingly being held accountable, correctly so, in my opinion, for putting data, putting tangible measures and tangible frameworks around something that historically has been a little vague and woolly. And that vague woolliness benefits nobody. It doesn't benefit the business and it doesn't benefit the individual.
I agree completely. I think like this is a really good segue into my next question. Speaking of vague and woolly, is like, how do you land on a value for something like this? What sort of process did you go through?
Yeah, it's a great question, because the leaders, the ERG leaders, come from all over the business. They're different functions, different countries, different roles, different job grades, and so on. So a percentage of salary would have felt inappropriate, and it wouldn't really work if we wanted to be fair. And obviously, fairness is a critical sort of principle at play here. Equity also allows us to be more generous, actually, because the value keeps on increasing, and it's a longer term investment. So, both in terms of the company culture, but also for the recipient. So cash bonuses, as we all know, drive behavior, but only in the relative short term. And we didn't want to encourage people to get involved in ERGs for the wrong reasons. So equity ticked a number of the boxes. So it was fair, long term, and it encouraged the right behaviors.
Yeah, interesting. And did you settle on one value for like the role of sort of supporting an
Yeah,
ERG, or is that it was great? Yeah, it was. Okay.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, wow.
exactly. So for a year's worth of work,
Yeah,
yes.
how interesting. I do love the switch from it being a kind of something that is paid monthly to, to kind of complement your living expenses to actually like, I think it makes it really clear that the work you're doing is tied in with the long-term impact and
Yes.
outcome of the business as well, which is
Yes.
particularly compelling.
Yes, no, 100%. And we've been talking about that quite a lot actually at the moment, in other areas of the business. And it's how do you set targets that
Yeah.
create a very clear relationship between the individual's contribution and the business direction? And it's very important, but quite difficult to do. And time frame is one of them. So a year is a more strategic and I
Mm,
time frame, and I use that in inverted commas because it's the most overused term. But
yeah.
what it means is that longer term business driver activity. Whereas, quarterly, it starts to sound like a commission target,
Yeah.
which drives great behaviors. And, commission isn't a very valuable structure that we have in our business, but it's not what we're trying to drive here. We are trying to drive longer term business value with our ERG work. And actually that's really important right now because obviously we all know the scrutiny that ESGDI is being put under. Um, we firmly believe that this work does drive business value, and that's the case we're building here. And the compensation structures around it need to reflect that goal.
Yeah, amazing. And it sounds like that high level buy-in was really held at the CEO level already without there having to be like
Oh,
material business cases and things like that.
oh, 100%. I mean, so Matt is very visibly very public about his
Mm,
commitment to this work. But both Matt and Richard, so Richard's the founder, um, my view, they own the equity distribution. And so we create frameworks and we create processes and we create philosophies and principles and all those good things and we operationalize all of them. But when it comes to equity, you're giving away the company. And that is the CEO slash founders prerogative. It's not mine. And I'm very, very clear on that. So
mm.
it's very important that if you are going to give it away, that they're brought along for the journey.
Absolutely. And I can imagine that would probably, even be involved at board level discussions with, PCs or
Oh, yeah.
whoever else has a share of the company, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. So I think you know, we have a strong board. They are engaged in this kind of work. It's not, it's not always obvious how uh boards operate at a different level. So there's a level of granularity to this work that I wouldn't expect a board to necessarily want to weigh in on. But certainly we are accountable to the board for every decision that we make. And as we grow, um, those structures, that level of accountability increases because the stakes get higher.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I'm curious then. So I guess all of this is about really creating structure and clarity and ownership and accountability and things like this. How do you decide what are the activities that are included and what aren't? Like what, if someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I've been performing this kind of, this unpaid task. I think it has value in the organization.
Mm.
I feel it warrants inclusion in this." How do you assess those sorts of things?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we knew that we needed to build a structure around this, and we did quite a lot of deep thinking about what an ERG is and isn't. So does an ERG need to be centered around a certain topic or a cause? What does the aim need to be, and what does it serve? What's the purpose? And also a really interesting question that Ella always asks is, what's the level of curation required? Because actually it's work. This is work to do this stuff. So a pets channel will never need a manifesto, for example, or leadership. But a parents channel could be an example of one that could evolve into an ERG. And we wanted to make sure that that an ERG was driving organizational change, unlike a community, which shares a lot of the aspects of an ERG, but it has less weight and responsibility for change. And we wanted to balance that structure with empowerment. So the ERGs that exist have been created by Muses. We haven't mandated them. Uh, but we created a handbook, parameters, job descriptions for the ambassadors of who are the people that lead the ERGs. And ambassadors need to gain approval from their managers to take on this work. So it's approximately about 5% of their time.
Okay.
And they can't be in needs development, which is our
Mm-hmm.
lowest performance score. So they need to be already performing.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a year-long commitment, which makes it easier to track. And as I said earlier, ensure accountability. So this isn't a role that they're going to hold forever, but we need their commitment and drive for the cycle that they're in, essentially. And so what we're going to do, actually, one of our plans for the future is to build feedback on the ERG work into the performance review cycle. Um, and it's also the other sort of aspect of the structure that we have is that there's a process for submitting a request to become an official ERG. And we have rejected some requests that we thought were too focused on hobbies and extracurriculars and weren't about driving organizational change. So the key is, does it drive organizational change? And then the second level question is, and what is the work involved? And does it warrant that ERG status?
Yeah, I love the thought that's gone behind this. I think as you were giving some of those examples, one that came to mind for me is that, a previous workplace that I worked at, we had a pets channel that required almost no involvement. It was, great. It was
Great,
very
though.
self-sufficient. Yeah.
Great. It's like it's my favorite. It's my favorite.
Yeah, it's
Slack
the most
channel,
poppin' channel of any company, I think. But then, you contrary to that, we had a mental health channel, and so it was very much trying to create a space where people felt comfortable and safe and could share some of the things that they were, challenges they were undergoing. But it really required a bit of rigor around ensuring people didn't treat it like therapy or that people acted like therapists. So there's a real fine line between creating space for, for these sorts of things and making it available to people where previously they haven't had it, and not kind of going overboard in maybe the expectations people have of the company or for others and things like that.
It's such a good example. So Mind at Mews, which is our ERG related to mental health, is, it is deeply sensitive work. And I feel, I actually feel, I'll get quite emotional about that one because I feel so proud that I work at an organization where there is that level of safety, that people can talk about these things. But you're absolutely right. You do have to be careful, and we've been given this, opportunity working in a place like Mews to do something like this. And, that opportunity comes with a set of responsibilities, because it is work, and it is our jobs, like in the broader sense. We work for Mews, and Mews is obviously, a commercial business. And so you have to sort of balance those things. And we're in service to those larger business objectives, essentially, ultimately. So it's how you balance those things is that, as you say, a lot of thought went into it because a lot of thought is required, especially when you're dealing with the most sensitive aspects of people's lives.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's clear that a lot of thought has gone into it. I mean, I feel like even just this conversation is such a great playbook for anyone considering the same thing. Speaking of which, to sort of round this out, like any tips you would share with anyone who's considering the same thing at their organization? Anything that you kind of looked back in hindsight and were like, "Oof, I wish we did that a little bit differently," or maybe something that worked especially well.
It's interesting. I think here's the thing, not everyone is going to agree with what you're doing. And if there's one thing I would do differently, it's not really a thing, but I would continue with confidence, because you can find yourself getting caught, decision paralysis, which is, classic people team problem. And I was listening to Toby Lutke, who is the CEO of Shopify, on Lenny's podcast on a long drive last week. And he said a lot of interesting things. And he's clearly a very interesting guy. But one of the things that I was really intrigued by what he said was, if you do what everyone else does, then you're never going to make things better. And playbooks have a value. in terms of structures and frameworks. But if you really want to drive change, then you have to think differently. And I encourage my team to think about the value add they're bringing to differentiators. And that's often a very human value add. Um, recognizing an individual's contribution. And it's like a flywheel, because if you want to differentiate, you need to innovate. To innovate, you need to experiment. And for that, you need safety. And for safety, you need to feel like you as a human matter. And that's where people teams come in. And that's where things like ERGs come in. So, people often don't formalize this work. And for a long time, we didn't formalize this work. And so the other thing I would do differently is I would go faster to get it done. Because culture building, which is what ERGs do, shouldn't be unrecognized. And the criteria is broad. Anyone can do it. It's not restricted to a group or a demographic. And if people feel that they're upset about not being compensated in this way, then they're empowered to do something about it. So that's the other thing, the other sort of principle at play here. It's about, as we grow, how do we delegate power out from the center? And so I suppose my final tip would be think about the principles at play and think about the business value that you're trying to drive relevant to the stage of the business you're at. And for Mews, with 1,300 people, you can't hold power in the center forever and ever. And if you want to innovate, you've got to do something different.
Yeah, I agree completely. Very sage advice. Thank you, Naomi, for running us through how to remunerate an ERG group. I appreciate it.
No worries. You're welcome.
And that's a wrap. Today we explored how compensating ERG roles creates structure, recognition, and long-term value. Make sure to follow the show for more ways to make compensation a true driver of culture and performance for your organization. Thanks for joining us on another edition of the Foundation Series. Make sure to head over to our website to subscribe to the Foundation Series for monthly editions featuring future interviews on startup compensation. In each edition, we'll explore the different strategies, trends, and challenges faced by startups around the world. If you have a burning topic you'd like me to cover or a standout guest that you want to hear from, drop me an email so I can dive deeper into the compensation topics that matter most to you. Join me next time as we continue to uncover the strategies and practices driving success in global tech startups around the world. Thanks for listening.